Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of Ambassador Ahmad Chaudhry, Director General Institute of Studies, Islamabad, Ambassador Khalid Mahmood, Chairman Board of Governors, Institute of Studies, Islamabad, I warmly welcome you all at today's web talk. Ladies and gentlemen, this web talk is organized by the Arms Control and Disarmament Center at the Institute on a very important and timely subject, and that is changing global dynamics of cyber threat and their impact on national security. The talk would be delivered by Mr. Farooq Nayyar, Chief Information Security Officer at Orion, which is one of the largest research and education network in Toronto, Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, since the last decade, the cyber threats have started to emerge as a significant risk to national security. And with time, the technological advancement in cyberspace and its growing integration with the political, social, cultural, economic, and military domains has made the states more vulnerable to these cyber threats. Especially after COVID-19 pandemic, states are greatly exposed to existing and emerging waves of cyber threats. With time, the dynamics of cyber threats have also changed. The nature of such threats has transformed from a common cyber attack or hacking incident by an individual or group to the development of defensive and offensive cyber warfare capabilities by the states. And there is a race to become the world's top cyber power. For example, the United States, China, Russia, Israel, and the UK are the leading cyber powers. And there are also reports that these powerful states are cooperating with each other to carry out large state-scale attacks against their adversaries, against their enemies. For example, the Indian cyber threats are growing against Pakistan. There are reports that India, with the cooperation of Israel, has stepped up its effort to strengthen its offensive cyber warfare capabilities against Pakistan. According to the December 2019 Guardian report, Israeli spyware allegedly used to target Pakistani officials' phones. Most recently, in August 2020, the ISPR stated that the Pakistani intelligence agencies had identified a major cyber attack by the Indian intelligence agencies, targeting the mobile phones and gadgets of government officials and military personnel. Such developments clearly highlight that these shifting dynamics of cyber threats would seriously affect national security. So with this premise, the ACDC and the ISSI has organized this web talk on changing global dynamics of cyber threats and their impact on national security to explore the answer of following questions. Number one, what are the changing global dynamics of cyberspace and what kind of cyber threats are emerging? Number two, how these cyber threats are going to impact international, regional, and national security. And number three, how we can mitigate these threats and formulate policy relevant recommendations for greater cooperation and engagement. Distinguished participants, with this brief introduction, we now formally begin our proceedings. For welcome remarks, I will invite Ambassador Ahmad Chaudhry. Before their welcome remarks, I would like to introduce himself, Ambassador Chaudhry. Although he doesn't need any introduction, but before joining the Institute, Ambassador Ahmad Chaudhry has served as a member of Foreign Service for 37 years. He served as Foreign Secretary of Pakistan for over 3 years. His last diplomatic assignment was an ambassador of Pakistan to the United States. He also authored a book titled Pakistan Mirror to Dutch Eyes, published by Sangemil publication. Ambassador Chaudhry has also great interest in benefiting from the application of modern technologies. Now I invite Ambassador Ahmad Chaudhry for his welcome remarks. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Qasim. Indeed, this is a very important subject that ACDC, the Arms Control and Disarmament Center of the Institute of Strategic Studies, has identified for this afternoon's program discussion. And I must commend you and your team, Rafiq and Ghazala, for putting it together. And also a very warm word of welcome to Mr. Farooq Nayyar, who is emerging as an authentic voice on cybersecurity issues. In today's times, cyberspace is indeed a strategic asset, which is being used by different actors and non-state actors for a variety of purposes, from e-governance and e-banking and e-commerce to communications. There is a growing dependency of all of us for use of cyberspace in our professional lives. We can see that there are opportunities, but then we can also see that we are increasingly becoming more vulnerable to a number of new threats. And the threat spectrum in cyberspace is pretty large and wide. A few months ago, when the coronavirus hit us, and like all other organizations, the IISsi also shifted to web-based programs. I remember it was March, and we were organizing our very first event, which happened to be coincidentally on Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where repression of the common people was the subject of discussion. Somewhere during the program, a hacker or two entered our meeting room, and they tried to be obscene and indecent. Immediately we closed the program, and thereafter we took a number of security measures, and after that we have done dozens of programs, and no hacker has been able to enter our activity. This is not to suggest that they cannot. They'll probably keep trying. But my sense is that the good guys are always one step ahead of the bad guys. I'm reminded of a letter that is attributed to Abraham Lincoln having written to the teacher of his son. If you open the Google, you'll find it everywhere. But I'm not sure whether it is an authentic letter or not. But one or two lines of that letter somehow are of abiding interest to me. Mr. Lincoln is reported to say to his son's teacher that teach the son that for every enemy there is a friend. That not all men are just and not all men are good. True. But teach him that for every scoundrel there is a hero. So if there were such hackers as the ones that tried to crash into our program, then we have heroes like Farooq Nayyar and many others who are working in this direction to make sure that enemies don't win in this new field of cyberspace. Since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, while cyberspace activity has increased, so have the cyber attacks, as I indicated. In our case, it was frankly, a few seconds affair, but quite a warning. The WHO has reported 5-fold increase on cyber attacks. Earlier in this week, the spokesman of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran announced that Iran had stopped a large number of cyber attacks targeting its nuclear facilities. Last month, the ISPR, Inter-Services Public Relations reported that a major cyber attack by Indian intelligence agencies was against Pakistani cyberspace, and that Indians were also involved in hacking personal mobiles and technical gadgets of government officials and military personnel. Several banks in Pakistan were hacked, causing huge economic losses. So, given the global importance of this field, it is clear to me that this must be handled with care and intelligence, and our response to all these threats should be appropriate, effective, efficient, comprehensive, and swift, because speed is the name of the game in cyber field. But the first step is moving from reactive mode to preemption. According to Microsoft's white paper titled Cyberspace 2025, Today's Decisions, Tomorrow's Terrain, more than 91% of the people in developed countries and nearly 69% in emerging economies will be using the internet by 2025. 91%, 69% will be using internet by 2025. That's practically the whole world. Therefore, we have to ensure availability of networks, maintain integrity and confidentiality of data and information. As Malik Qasim has already introduced research questions, to laymen like me also arise the questions whether what exactly is the nature of the emerging threats in cyberspace and how would they impact national security in different countries, and what policy choices and infrastructure options do we have or can we have to meet those threats. So I'm looking forward to hearing Mr. Farooq Nayyar and the two discussions that we would have and an interesting discussion on this topic. Thank you, and back to you, Qasim.
Thank you, Ambassador Zasa, for extending a very warm welcome to our guests and setting the tone of this web talk. Distinguished participants, so now we'll move towards the main attraction of our today's event. Mr. Farooq Nayyar is Chief Information Security Officer at Orion, which is the largest research and education network in Canada. He has a rich experience of more than 80 years in the areas of cybersecurity, privacy, technology compliance, and assurance. Before joining Orion, Farooq was part of cybersecurity and privacy team at PwC in Canada and other leadership roles in leading financial institutions in the Middle East and South Asia. He has a strong academic background and holds various awards and leading certificates in the area of information security and IT assurance. Now I request Mr. Farooq Nayyar to deliver his talk on the subject, changing global dynamics of cyber threats and their impact on national security. Farooq sir, you have the floor now.
Welcome everybody. Just doing a sound check. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, and I'm also sharing my screen. I hope everybody can see my screen now.
Sure,
yeah.
Please go.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the Institute of Strategic Studies for giving me the opportunity of speaking today. And would like to start off by saying that Azaz Saab just has set the stage in such a way that I think talking on this subject would make things easy for me. I think he's given a very good background about the current threat landscape, about the role of state actors, and Malik Saab also gave a really good introduction. So thank you for that, and thank you for your kind introduction. So I'll hit the ground running, and we'll start off with today's talk. So a couple of things. So one of the things that I want to say today is that I work closely with the government over here. So I just want to give a disclaimer over here. So anything which I'm going to be sharing today are my own views. They are not the views of the organization that I work with, the government of Canada, or any organizations that I work with. This is more of an awareness session in which I'm going to be sharing awareness about various cyber threats. So anything which I express today are my own opinions. Anyway, so Malik Saab just introduced me. So I'm currently working at Orion as a Chief Information Security Officer, which is the research and education network for the province. I'm also a shared CISO for about 14 universities and 13 colleges. And I work in advisory capacities at various universities and colleges and serve on various advisory boards too. And I was recently appointed on the Central Executive Committee for Canada-Pakistan Research and Development Council on innovation and emerging technologies too. You guys can also follow me on Twitter at Farooq Wahab, on which I do from time to time share my views on the recent cyber threats. Anyway, so as part of today's discussion, I'm going to be talking briefly about the current threat landscape and trends. We'll briefly talk about what's showing up on the headlines. We see news about cyber threats every day in the headlines. And then towards the end, I'll talk about how Pakistan is positioned in this whole threat landscape. And then I'll briefly talk about the recommendations. I will be cognizant of time, so I'll make sure that I'm able to finish my talk within 50 minutes. Anyway, so just a brief introduction about this topic itself. So we live, as Ambassador Saab mentioned, we live in a different world right now. A proliferation and commodification of cyber offensive capabilities is reshaping the cyber balance of power right now. And it's enabling an expanded array of actors, which is state actors and non-state actors, to use cyber for geopolitical impact or economic gain. And from the use of offensive cyber attacks by nation states directly against another, or by co-opting cyber criminals, this trend has blurred the lines between spies, non-state actors, and malicious hackers. And because of that, what's happening is that an expanding array of new entrants, like both nation states and non-state actors with significant capabilities, is reshaping cyber threat landscape. And the tools at their disposal allow for unprecedented espionage and surveillance capabilities, which often are the precursors for criminal financial gain, destruction, and disruption of operations. Just as the vulnerability surface for cyber is marked by mostly civilian infrastructure, so increasingly are we seeing non-state actors, including commercial entities, building capabilities that years ago were solely held by a handful of state actors. And this is something which is an area of concern, and I will be shedding more light on this, is that nations are not just threatened by state actors, they're threatened by non-state actors too. So the proliferation of cyber tools, which are hard to control and contain, is lowering the barriers to entry, and the ability to buy capabilities off the shelf, to bridge gaps in capabilities, or to build tailored tools organically ensures the complex dynamics of the current cyber threat landscape will continue to challenge national security, the commercial sector, and civilian, particularly vulnerable populations. So anyways, I'll get today's discussion started, and I'll shed more light on this subject. So I would like to start off about talking about the current threat landscape. I'm a numbers person, so I'll talk about the current stats. So the current stats that I'm quoting to you is from a cybersecurity organization called NetScout. So based on the last quarter of 2019's report, what they have reported is, if you see the right-hand corner of my slide, you'll see the 4 sub-vertical sector which are the most threatened from cyber attacks. And these are things which I want to shed more light on because this is a subject which hits close to home in Pakistan. You'll see wired telecommunication carriers, second telecommunication carriers, third one is data processing and hosting, and the fourth one is wireless telecommunication carriers, which are the most vulnerable to cyber attacks by state actors and non-state actors. You'll see out of these 3 categories, out of these 4 categories, 3 are the ones which pertain to telecommunications. So telecommunication is the main area which is being targeted. And once you are into the telecommunication infrastructure, then you talk about lateral movement and then you go after other things. And this is where I'll be talking more on as part of today's talk. Apart from that, if you look at the left-hand corner of my screen, you'll also see the sectors, the other sectors which are a huge target. And I will just talk about 4 sectors which have seen a great increase in the past 12 to 14 months. So you'll see that about 598% increase in airwaves. So anything which relates to telecommunications has been targeted, and that the whole rate is around almost 600%, which is a lot. You'll also see that there has been an increase in carpet bombing satellite telecommunications. So carpet bombing is a technique, and I promise you I won't go into technical details. It's a technique for conducting distributed denial of service attack, and a distributed denial of service attack causes a downtime in connectivity, causes disruption of any kind of internet connectivity. So almost 300% increase in that. You'll also see that chemical manufacturing industry has also been hit. And chemical manufacturing industry does provide raw material for not just for medicinal purposes or industrial use, but also provides some kind of raw material for weaponry also. There's been almost 700% increase in that. So we live in a different world right now, and cyber threats are on the rise, and they are a reality which organizations and nations should accept. So I just wanted to give you the numbers out there. Now, there's another pie chart that I want to talk about briefly, and this talks about the kinds of cybercrime or electronic crimes which have been reported in the past year or so. And this is from a really credible cyber threat intelligence organization called CrowdStrike. And according to this, what it says is that there has been more than 25% of the cyber crimes are attributed to ransomware. And when I talk about the headlines and the current trends, I will tell you why. And you'll see that most of these threats are associated with nation states or with organized cybercrime organizations. You'll also see that almost a similar percentage is associated with banking Trojans. So cyber criminals are either encrypting files or leaking data over the dark web, or they're going after the financial sector. And the third part of the quadrant is attributed to malwares. Emotet is also an organized cybercrime organization which has a sophisticated malware which is incorporated in Microsoft Office files. So these 3 quadrants represent a major chunk of electronic crimes. All of the rest of the things do not make such big part of the pie chart, but they're also out there, like botnets and phishing campaigns. But you'll see ransomware, banking Trojans, and 4 to 5 key malwares have taken over a big chunk of the cybercrime piece. And I would like to say it again, it's not just state actors, it's non-state actors. Anyways, taking the discussion forward. So Ambassador Saab just spoke briefly about how nation states are threatening their adversaries, even their allies at times, and how is this whole thing changing the dynamics. So I'd like to pick up on at least 2 to 3 stories, and these are things which you'll not see in the news, or you'll not see people talking about that. So last week, I'm sure most of you would have seen the news about the New Zealand Stock Exchange being down for 2 days. And then the New Zealand Stock Exchange was attacked again this week. Does anybody know why? Because the day the killer for the mosque attack in New Zealand was convicted, just 24 hours before that, the key infrastructure in New Zealand was hit. The Western media would not ever talk about that. The reason for that was that this guy who was involved in the New Zealand attack was not acting alone. He was backed by a group, a global group of white supremacists who were against Muslims, against colored people. And because of that, the New Zealand government bared the brunt for that. The New Zealand government took a stand and they paid a price for that. But they wanted to make sure that they do prosecute that person and he's convicted, but they paid the price for that. So this is the impact of the geopolitical situation. If somebody or some organization or some nation does not agree with your ideology or your foreign policy or your national policy, they will come up after you. You'll see the same thing with Australia. Australia, about 2 months ago, their entire national infrastructure was under a cyber attack to an extent that their prime minister had to make an official statement. And why? Because they had some strong views against certain state actors. Okay. And you'll also see that Israel has been a constant target for cyber attacks. And the reason for that is, I mean, it's tit for tat. If they are going after nation states, then nation states are going to come after them. I think we all know what happened a few years ago with Iran. I mean, the Stuxnet malware. Nobody acknowledges what happened, but that one malware was responsible for crippling Iran's nuclear program. And that's why Iran has become so offensive. And the same thing goes for Israel, and North Korea has been after them. You also see that there has been a dynamic increase in ransomware attack. These Emotet attacks are attributed to this gang, which I was just talking about, an organized cyber criminal gang, which is going after nation states. So in the world of, since you guys are associated with arms control, you must be familiar with the term called mercenaries. So now in the world of cybersecurity, we've got cyber mercenaries. So at times, nation states hire cyber mercenaries to carry out cyber attacks on their behalf. So what's happening is that now these organized gangs are going after nations. Like the recent Emotet attacks are going after France, Japan, New Zealand, and there's been quite an uptake on these attacks. Anyways, this is a reality which people should accept, and it's not just the nations which should be careful about this. It should be the private sector organizations also. Ambassador Saab just mentioned about the recent wave of attacks on Pakistan. I will talk briefly about that. But about 48 hours ago, I'm sure submitted to the news right now that a leading power generation and distribution organization in Pakistan was hit by a ransomware. Now, the ransomware they were hit by was the same ransomware which has hit public sector in the US and Canada. And I have been warning about this ransomware for the past 2 to 3 months. I've been telling organizations that a ransomware which hits US today is going to be hitting Pakistan in the next 3 weeks. It's hitting the Middle East and Far East countries. So we live in a global world right now. So any cyber threats posed to any other nation states in the world could be coming after any other countries also. But anyways, this is what's making headlines right now. And given the current pandemic, the increase in cyber attacks has gone up by 600%. So let's talk about what's going on in Pakistan. So just a few things I want to talk about over here. Just bear with me. Yeah. So a few things with regards to Pakistan. So one of the first things that I want to talk about is how is Pakistan positioned to counter cyber attacks. So in 2019, a leading VPN organization had published a report, a global index on how nations are prepared to respond to cyber threats. And this index was based on 4 main criteria. One was capacity building, the second operation, third was organizational policy, and then technical institutions frameworks, and then legal institutions and frameworks for dealing with cybersecurity and cybercrime. Quite sadly, Pakistan is not high up on that list for these 4 reasons. But the reason why I want to talk about this is that, I mean, if Pakistan is taking actions on various fronts, they need to get more organized. And towards the end, I'll talk from the recommendations perspective also. But from the cyber readiness perspective, there are many areas Pakistan still needs to work really hard on. The other thing which I want to bring your attention towards is something which Ambassador Saab also mentioned, is tensions in South Asia. This is a reality which I think we all know about. So before the 27th February skirmish between Pakistan and India last year, the cyber warfare had started long before that. And what is happening was that there was lots of APT activity, advanced persistent threat activity between India and Pakistan, in which both of these nation states were going after each other. And because of that, there was an increase in distributed denial of service attacks, and both of these countries were going after each other's critical infrastructure and private and public organizations also. But anyways, this is something which is an active threat. And I think based on what I'm seeing in the news, I think Pakistan is taking measures, not just from the private sector front, but from the military and public sector front also. The third thing which I want to spend more time on, because I think everybody knows about the Pakistan and India tension, so I won't bore you with that information. Third thing which I really want to spend some time on is evolving geopolitical situation. We are moving in a situation, not just us, but the whole world, where the global dynamics has changed due to various factors, be it the pandemic, be it the current bilateral trades, the current bilateral arrangements and everything. But what's happening is that the enemies of tomorrow, yesterday, are now our friends or allies for various countries, and that's going to be affecting many things. We all know what has happened in the Middle East. In the Middle East, the dynamics are shifting quite fast. UAE has now signed an agreement with Israel, which has resulted in lots of tensions within UAE itself. Apart from that, what's happening is that the entire bloc, which is now coming up in South Asia, in Central Asia, and Far East, and a big part of Turkey and all these countries, is resulting in another block of countries who are going to be working together. And because of that, there is an increase of let's just say nation state activities, and all of these things are going to be instrumental in many things. Like, for instance, I gave you the example of New Zealand. Just the fact that that country took a stand, they were under a cyber attack. Just imagine what's going to happen if a certain country changes its foreign policy, starts having an agreement. Like, for instance, UAE for the longest time was sympathizing with Palestine. I mean, I'm sure they still are, but various people, various state and non-state actors take these things differently. And they will be working on, and they are working on causing disruptions in some form or the other. And Pakistan could be faced with similar things based on what kind of path Pakistan adopts. So all of these things should be taken into consideration. The next thing which I want to talk about briefly, and I want to be cognizant of time over here, is fifth generation warfare. So I want to talk briefly about a bit of a news article which appeared back in November 2019, where researchers discovered a network of about 265 local news sites named after defunct newspapers and media outlets, and across 65 countries, were being used to disseminate anti-Pakistan coverage and serve Indian governmental interests. So I think it's quite obvious. I mean, that our neighbor is working diligently on creating disinformation about Pakistan, and this whole news, which made headlines back in November 2019, was a cause of great grief to India, because action was taken against those news outlets, and they were shut down. So yeah, so this is something which not just India, but any other states which are against Pakistan, they are creating lots of disinformation, or in the words of Donald Trump, creating lots of fake news against us. And I'm sure Pakistan is countering that to some extent, but from time to time, these things do appear, and they do tend to tarnish the image of Pakistan. So I'm sure this is something which is of importance, and we should be laying lots of emphasis on this. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this is that fifth generation warfare is part of cyber crime. It's not just malwares and ransomware or breaches. The other thing which I want to talk about is potential targets in Pakistan. The potential targets in Pakistan is not just government sector entities, but private sector entities also. So anything which falls within the purview of critical infrastructure. So power generation companies, gas distribution companies, companies providing any kind of services to the local or the entire population of Pakistan could be under a cyber attack or could be under threat. And any critical organizations are also a potential target also. The other thing which I wanted to mention briefly is that any strategic initiative that we are working on could be a target too. So things like CPEC, National Highway Authority, anything which is enabling the government to work or to provide services could be a significant target also. But one of the things that I want to acknowledge right now is that lots of work is being done in Pakistan from private sector players in order to make sure that anything with regards to cyber threats is shared or as part of a threat intelligence network. So I think, and I think Al Khwaja will talk about that briefly, but State Bank of Pakistan and Pakistan Telecommunications Authority is working diligently to make sure that if there is a cyber threat out there which could be affecting Pakistani organization, they make sure that they share that piece of information. Anyways, moving towards the conclusion of my talk today, I'll talk briefly about the recommendation. You'll see that I have a long list of things out there, but I'll talk briefly about them. The first thing is that there needs to be a national cybersecurity policy and framework in Pakistan. We do have legislations in the past 16 to 18 years, mashallah, there have been various legislations, starting from Electronic Transactions Ordinance in 2002 to Prevention of Electronic Crimes Ordinance in mid 2000s. And then recently we've got PICA, which is Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, I think it was promulgated about 3 years ago. So these are legislations, we still need to have a framework, and I know there's some work being done on a Data Protection Act right now. The second thing is that the leadership in public and private sector organization must posture their organizations for a growing risk of surprise in cyberspace. So cyberspace is going to be coming up with surprises every now and then. And the solution for that is that organizations should have a more proactive approach towards cybersecurity. And what this means is that we need to have cybersecurity incident response teams, not just at the national level, not just at the ministerial level, but at every organization. Every organization, large and small, should have cybersecurity incident response team, which should be working around the clock to respond to cybersecurity incidents. The second thing is capacity building. We need to train more people in Pakistan in the area of incident response and threat intelligence. As cybersecurity has now turned into a diverse field, and we are getting more in, I mean, we have professionals in Pakistan, but we need more professionals in the area of threat intelligence, cyber threat intelligence, and incident response. The other thing which I want to talk about, which also relates to threat intelligence, is that cyber threat intelligence will need to evolve from incorporating indicators of compromise gleaned from detected activity. So let me translate that into simple words. What this means is that if some organization is seeing a cyber attack and has identified some indicators of compromise, and this information could be helpful in preventing a similar activity in another organization, they should make sure that this information is shared in a timely basis. The other thing is we need to be as much proactive as we can from the operation and technical resilience point of view, private and public sector. The other thing is, and this is for organizations like ISSI particularly, is that government entities, researchers, and think tanks can likely assist public and private sector organizations in posturing for this new environment by developing standards and template processes for using geopolitical analysis to drive cyber defense. The next one is senior executives can prepare their workforces for this environment by developing consistent, multidimensional communication strategy. Whenever a cyber incident takes place, the next thing which an organization does is they need to have a communications plan. They need to have a PR person in place to make sure that they are making statements. The head of the organization, the head of the state should have a template for an address to the nation or an address to the public about what are they going to be telling the people. The next thing is that new approaches for government and private sector collaboration must be created to ensure national security, as private sector firms increasingly become frontline targets for foreign actors. The ransomware attack which took place in Karachi 2 days ago was targeting a private sector entity, but was disrupting lots of things. So we need to make sure that a private-public partnership, including partnership with the military, should be there to ensure that any cyber attack in Pakistan is thwarted or responded to on a timely manner. Towards the end, I would like to repeat again that we need to have a repeatable approach for collaboration to ensure, which should define roles and responsibilities for private firms and various government entities that have a role in protecting national security and conducting law enforcement. And with that, I would like to conclude my session. I hope I managed the time properly, but cybersecurity is a clear and present danger, and I think we need to get more organized in order to counter such threats. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Farooq Saab, for giving an excellent talk on the subject. And you have rightly pointed out that we have to identify our roles and we have to protect our national security. Either it's a government entity or it's a private sector. With this, ladies and gentlemen, we have also invited Khwaja Muhammad Ali as a discussant for today's talk. And I'll briefly tell about the profile of Khwaja Muhammad Ali. Khwaja Muhammad Ali is Chief Information and Cybersecurity Officer, Agriculture Development Bank of Pakistan, and is also a cyber warfare subject matter expert at Defense and Strategic Studies Islamabad. University Islamabad. Khwaja Ali has over 19 years of multi-sectoral experience with a diverse industry exposure associating high-tech crimes investigation, cybersecurity, data privacy, and governance issues. Now I invite Khwaja Muhammad Ali to share his thoughts on the subject.
Thank you, Malik Saab. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope I am audible.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Starting from Malik Qasim Mustafa, and then Ambassador Chaudhary mentioned in detail the threat landscape and the importance of cyber security. And then obviously Farooq Wahab briefing about the overall global threat landscape in the cyberspace and the importance toward the regional stability and all those areas to do with. So warfare from air, sea, land has moved to cyberspace, or rather I'll say has enhanced to cyberspace and space itself. There is a serious need for civil military cooperation and a regional approach in the cyber domain. Just like we tackle our conventional war games. In conventional warfares, the security, the military triad can independently operate in your land, sea, and air areas, and can safeguard our physical borders, right? But we all know, like Farooq also mentioned, that cyber element is not only on the borders. Actually, there are no physical geographical boundaries. It's a part and parcel of each and every activity of any nation. So every institution has to have a cyber security setup or cyber operation setup in place and technology setup in place. But since just like we have post-conflict scenarios that military has to take care of, likewise in case if there is a cyber attack on any civil institution, so military now has to take care of that also. So this is an added burden, or rather I'd say an added responsibility given to the military domain. So there comes the need for civil military cooperation, and so that has to be done with the right strategy. And like we all discussed, and we all know the importance of this region, which includes Pakistan, CPAC coming in, and some agreements ending in another 2-3 years time in the region, and then the whole scenario being changed globally and regionally. So we have to align ourselves accordingly in the region as well. We have to ensure our defense capability in the cyberspace, and to combat cyber threats, because we see intentions on the adversary side and on others also, and that includes states and non-state actors as well. Again, Farooq mentioned a couple of times that we should not leave behind the element of non-state actors. So the intentions that we see on that side is a sufficient highlighter or a sufficient signal that we should have at least our defense capabilities in the cyberspace in place to secure the digital frontiers. And when we develop our capabilities, the first thing comes in the mind is CI protection, the critical infrastructure protection. That's no more the military domain only. It covers your banking sector, it covers your telecom sector, it covers your energy sector. We just mentioned about the largest energy operator in Pakistan. They're just facing this issue, and all the civic services. And then when talk about the whole ecosystem, Kareem and Uber and all those innovative business functions that are totally dependent on the cyberspace, which can, if God forbid, if they come down, if they come under an attack, the whole ecosystem of the country or the state can come down. So that is an added responsibility towards military also, and they can be the attack on those CI infrastructure, critical infrastructure, could be from the non-state actors. It could be a post-conflict scenario. It could be, you know, a direct attack by a state or something. So, and like Chaudhry, Ambassador Chaudhry mentioned that during the pandemic, recent pandemic time, so the lifeline, or the, the last, I call it the last resort, or the lifeline, was the cyberspace. Everything was shut down. Everything was, you know, there was a social distancing otherwise. So the only thing, or the only survival element, was to be, you know, on cyberspace. So that highlights the importance. The second element I would like to highlight here is we need to develop our capabilities in the cyberspace. One, by protecting our critical infrastructure, by deploying technology. It could be indigenously developed. And like I mentioned in our previous talk also, that before, you know, instead of waiting of our deploying our own indigenous technology or capabilities in place, we should align with regional partners, our friendly countries who have already excelled in that domain. And we should partner with them on, you know, some kind of, you know, on built operator transfer or technology transfer basis, or whatever we call it. So we need to get into those kind of approaches in regions. The other element is training. While we are having this discussion, I would just like to tell you that, again, that association, Pakistan Information Security Association, which participates a drill with Spain today. We got over with it. There's another one which is a big cyber drill happening in the region. It is being led by Oman, the cyber emergency team. This cyber team this time. So Pakistan again will participate there. So we need to have these kind of arrangements in the region, and officially, which we lack, unfortunately. And another very important element I would like to highlight, again, which Farooq also mentioned, is the cyber diplomacy that we have to take care of. The training and the capabilities that we may possess is not enough. We need to have a serious cyber diplomacy dialogue, arrangement, relationship with you know, the rest of the world. We need to align with the rest of the world in this cyber space, and we just cannot survive, you know, having our own roads and highways in the cyberspace. We have to, you know, we can have our own vehicle, but we have to follow the same rules which others follow. So that's a very important area. And in cyberspace, there are no geographical boundaries. So an attack in one part of world, I say, should be considered as if that has happened on us. Again, like Farooq mentioned, that, you know, if some attack has happened on on some, you know, in infrastructure of one state, so it's not a matter of if that happens on some other institution or state. It's a matter of when that will happen. So we need to be better prepared. So every new attack anywhere that happens in the world gets added to the inventory of cyber attacks or cyber threats that we should be ready for. Again, like Ambassador Chaudhry also mentioned, the importance of digital world coming up in the cyberspace. I would like to also add here that FATF, in its recent guidelines, which I would say were released just before this recent pandemic, highlighted then even that in the next 2 years, overall world's GDP, like 65 to 70% and more world's GDP would be digitized. So we can all imagine the threat that is coming on the GDP of the world. So GDP is the lifeline of any state. So with this, I would just like to conclude my remarks and talks, and I would like to, on my behalf, and thank you, Farooq, for highlighting us with the latest news and the importance of the area. And I would like to thank you, ISSI, for this and open for question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Khwaja Muhammad Ali Saab. And you have rightly pointed out that we have to develop, and there's a need for cyber diplomacy, because to mitigate the cyber threat challenges, we need international cooperation and cooperation from our friends to develop our infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, now I'll invite the second discussant of today's talk, Ms. Amna Rafiq. She is a research associate at the ACDC ISSI. Ms. Rafiq has previously worked with Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs Act SPD, Pakistan Institute for Parliamentary Services, PIPS, Islamabad, and Pakistan Senate. Her area of expertise includes cyberspace, emerging technologies, arms control, and disarmament. Now I invite Ms. Amna Rafiq to share her thoughts on the talk. You have the floor, Amna.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum and good evening, all of you. First of all, I want to express my gratitude to Ambassador Azaz Ahmad Chaudhry, Director General ISSI, for giving me this opportunity to share my views today. I also want to commend Mr. Farooq Nayyar and Mr. Khwaja Ali for their excellent presentations. So building on what Mr. Nayyar said about the proliferation of cyber technologies and misuse by the state and the non-state actors, I will try to connect this entire debate with the arms control and establishment of an international regime to regulate the cyberspace. So cyberspace appeared on UN agenda for the first time in 1998 when a Russian resolution was unanimously approved at the first committee. Under the mandate of the UN General Assembly, 6 groups of governmental experts were formed, like in 2004, 2009, 12, 15, 17, and 18, but majority of them couldn't accomplish the desired goal. So after more than 20 years of rigorous effort, debate, and initiatives, the negotiation for international legal regime for cyberspace is still in doldrums. So previously, states successfully negotiated international legal regimes on range of the complex fields like nuclear, outer space, high seas, but now they are unable to reach consensus on cyberspace. There are various intricate issue areas which are hindering this development and the consensus. So I will briefly discuss 3 of them. The first major difference is, first major issue area is the difference of cyber ideologies. Like they mentioned that on one hand, we have a bunch of states favoring a secure and open internet, like Mr. Farooq Nayyar and Khwaja Ali said that there are no boundaries in cyberspace. So these are the states who want to maintain this status quo right now and want to ensure it as an international standard practice. On the other hand, there are states supporting the notion of cyber sovereignty. So they believe that keeping in view all these emerging threats, states should be free to design the contours of their national cyberspace according to their own needs and national laws without any external interference and pressures. So it is a debate of centralized control versus an open cyberspace. Second problem or the challenge of unable to achieve this consensus is the applicability of the existing international law. The question is whether the existing laws and norms are enough, or do we need a new regime for this? Again, there are differences among the states who believe that existing international law, especially UN Charter, is completely applicable to the wide range of subject areas from minor cybercrime to the armed conflict. So for them, cyberspace is just another technology which requires an extra effort. On the other side, there are states who hold a view that cyber technologies are incompatible with the existing legal framework, and there should be new international legal structure, including norms, principles, and conventions. So I personally in support of this argument because there are a lot of new concepts like attributions and defining critical infrastructures, and existing international law is not capable of dealing with these issues. And then there are all concepts like arms control, self-defense, arms race, espionage, armed conflict, and warfare, and their dynamics in cyberspace is pulls apart from their existing or traditional understanding right now. So another linked discord is the applicability of international humanitarian law. So there are small, or we can say the weak states, which believe that this could lead to the further militarization of the cyberspace, because we are aware that states in the past states misused the notion of protection of the human rights and interfered in the domestic or the national issues of the weak states. So they believe that it will further create unrest, or the states could use this logic to impose different kind of like digital sanctions or the military interventions. So third and the last challenge which I'm going to address is the threat threshold. So building on what Ambassador Azaz Ahmed Chaudhry, DGISSI said about the threat spectrum in cyberspace, we have to identify various thresholds on this spectrum, especially for an armed conflict. This threshold will be different for different states. The threshold determination is extremely important, especially when we talk about the applicability of the Article 51 of the UN Charter on Right of Self-Defense. And with reference to the Pakistan, this is extremely significant because India is in favor of using Article 1 in cyberspace, and India is also trying to introduce a new normal in South Asia where like under the nuclear threshold, there is a lot of possibility of limited conventional warfare. And India also introduced a new triad of cyberspace, outer space, and surgical strike in its joint military doctrine. So in case this Article 51 got approved, and it will be applicable on cyberspace, then it will create a lot of difficulty for Pakistan, especially because India anytime can use a minor cyber attack to launch a full-fledged surgical strike on Pakistan. So the exercise of determining a threshold is relatively easy in other domains because of the practice and the debate over the course of the time, but the dynamics of this Article 51 is extremely complex in cyberspace. So what should be the categorization of cyber armed conflict? How to determine the cyber threshold when the technological advancement is not uniform? What kind of the infrastructures should be declared as the critical infrastructure? And how to put into effect the right of self-defense when cyberspace has not caused any visible damage? So as previously highlighted, that the concept of the combatants and non-combatants is also very different in cyberspace. So to conclude, the best way to deal with these emerging threats is to establish an international cyberspace regime. And as Joseph Nair gave the idea of regime complex for cyberspace governance, and I really support this idea because this complex will be a set of loosely connected cyber regime with a specific level of coherence and overlap. So instead of taking all issues at once, we should try to segregate issue areas. Like we can handle the threats in the economic domain. There can be a separate regime for handling the economic threats and financial issues, and then there is a military side, and then critical infrastructures and information warfare. So we can have different small regimes, and then we can to segregate these issue areas or with respect to the critical infrastructures or the cyber technology, and then at the end connect all of them, or we can say that develop a synergy between all these small regimes. So that's all from my side. I look forward to a very productive discussion during Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Amna Rafiq. Since Mr. Farooq have another engagement and he has to leave, So we have requested him to stay for question and answer session. And I would like to request Mr. Farooq to answer some of the questions raised by the participants. The number one question is, where does Pakistan stand in terms of cyber security? Mr. Farooq, would you like to respond to this question? I think he has already left. Maybe Mr. Khwaja Muhammad Ali, would you like to respond to these questions?
Yeah, I'm comfortable.
Stands in terms of cyber security.
We've discussed where we stand in terms of cybersecurity, but when we start with the cybersecurity policy and strategy, I would say we definitely lack a formalized cybersecurity strategy as a nation. That is not in place, obviously, in a simple liner. There have been efforts. It's over like a decade now, I would say. Even we touched the Senate for this. Senate spent time on this. So there was an effort made in 2013 and 14. The bill was prepared, drafted, involving all the relevant stakeholders, or at least the major possible. So that element is still missing. Somehow, just like all governments, this government is also working on it, and we're hopeful. But the other element, when I say this, that is not existing, that does not mean that we do not possess capability in that domain. Our institutions, especially when we talk about our private sector, they have their own arrangements. The international organizations that work in Pakistan, operate in Pakistan, they operate, keeping in view the risks, and they work accordingly. So they have their cyber defense setups in place. Likewise, when we talk about our critical or important institutions like strategic institutions of Pakistan, including military and civil side board. So, but the efforts are there in isolation. Like I mentioned, it's not only about having a coordinated effort within civil side and within military side. We should be talking about civil military cooperation in this domain. So there has to be some kind of NCOC, like we say, the centralized national, whatever that domain we have, that setup we have in place for other things. We should have something of the sort here, ideally sitting somewhere under the National Security Division, or like in other areas. So I would say that efforts are being made, but yes, it's not formalized as yet.
Thank you, Khwaja Sahab. I think Mr. Farooq Sahab has joined us again, and we would like to ask another question from Mr. Farooq, that what are the readiness challenges Pakistan is facing in this regard? Farooq Sahab, you have the floor. Unmute. Farooq Sahab, you have to unmute your mic.
Qasim, I'll also make a few comments and a question.
Okay, sir. Farooq Sahab, can you hear us? Farooq Sahab, can you hear us?
You have to unmute him.
Sir, we have sent the request. Kindly unmute yourself.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, Falcon. Sorry about that.
Please go ahead.
Gee, sorry. Okay, so a couple of things. You just said that what are the key steps that Pakistan needs to take from the perspective of being from the cybersecurity policy readiness perspective. So I think the first thing that I mentioned in the recommendation was that we need to have a unified cybersecurity policy and framework for Pakistan. And the second thing is that we need to have practical steps taken in the area of having cybersecurity incident response teams and having a proper mechanism of having efficient cyber threat intelligence in place. So these are the three things that we need to do immediately.
Thank you, Farooq sir. Now I will invite Ambassador Azam Chaudhary sir for his remarks. Sir.
Thank you, Qasim. Very interesting. I have a few observations and see if anyone, the discussants or the speaker, wants to address that. One that Farooq Saab had indicated one requirement that every organization should have cyber incident response and cyber threat intelligence. My question is that for an organization, for a medium-sized organization, what will it mean in terms of technical infrastructure and financial costs? Just hold on, I'll repeat some of the observations. I'll repeat some of the observations so that I don't have to come in again. The other, and pardon my ignorance on not being that literate on technical issues, but this question that I want to ask is again a layman question. We do see that the base of entire technology that we are using these days is mostly US based or Western technology, all these applications that we are using. And we heard from Amna that there is no consensus on having its own international law governing cyberspace. And the US maintains that existing international law is enough. It is just another technology. But what happens if what Amna mentioned, that some Western states, the United States is angry with the nation and wants to impose digital sanctions and takes away this entire carpet from under our feet? Where will we be left with, and how, and is there a way for nations to be self-sufficient in creating that base, that plumbing base for the technology that they have to use? And my third observation or comment would be on cyber diplomacy concept that Khaja Muhammad Ali Sahib had introduced. I like it because these days almost everything has become a shadow or a shade of diplomacy, and so cyber diplomacy is no different. I do agree with his logic that you need dialogue, you need relationships, you need strengthening of capabilities through mutual cooperation and so on. And we honestly had not thought about it. At least I had not, and I think this is, we have a new facet of science diplomacy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs now, which is with which ACDC is cooperating. I wonder how we would introduce this and how useful, how much great use we can make out of it. So just these three observations, anyone can address them. Thank you.
Khaja Muhammad Ali sir, would you like to respond to these questions?
Yeah, thank you. I would quickly like to answer all three from my perspective. Starting from the cost of cyber emergency response teams that any setup can have. So in layman term, what a CERT is actually, it's simple. Cyber security is basically, it's now called an operations domain thing. I'll just explain it as like we have a computer and we have Windows installed in it. So likewise, we have an antivirus in it. So in older times, antivirus was, it was a good thing to have, but now it's a mandatory thing to have. If you have Windows in place, you have to have an antivirus in place. So cybersecurity is basically an operational equipment. So this is again technology, just like IT and the innovation that is going on in the world. So same is the case with our cyber operations. So you can say, just like we have antivirus in place, we have a specialized kind of antivirus in place that is called a cybersecurity emergency response team, which involves obviously people, technology, processes, and the way things work and all that. It requires involvement, engagement, and how it works. It relates to it getting engaged with other certs of other organizations and other countries, so that each can benefit from each other, and they can make a good cyber threat intelligence kind of database which can benefit different institutions. So maybe perceiving that why this question came in your mind, probably that is the cost something which is hindering people from installing it. So I would say it's not the cost issue. It's not a cost intensive thing. Yeah, it is expensive, but it's as expensive as buying a Toyota Corolla. It's as expensive as buying a Mercedes. Is as expensive as building an institution. Is as expensive as buying a computer. So if we have to have a computer in place, we have to have a certain place. This is how I take it. Uh, then we talk about question 2, which is like the technology owned by US or some, maybe it could be from our adversaries. So you would recall our discussion last time I explicitly stressed on this region, that on this area, that in cyber domain there are covert operations going on. So whenever we buy an equipment, like you pointed out well, whenever we buy an equipment from a foreign country or from some adversary, maybe you can say, and we have that in place, the question that there is no covert connection, I believe that is not the case. So we should be ready for that. For that, I have been repeatedly saying we should talk to our neighbors, to our friendly countries. We should adopt a regional approach, and we should develop our immunity in the cyberspace and a comfort, our trusted zone, so that we can concentrate on our delivery side, on our performance side. So yes, that concern is there. The technology is very expensive, and if we talk about in total that the investment made on technology in an individual organization, up to 60 to 70% expense of an institution is on technology. If you just go and see the financials of any good institutions in Pakistan alone, I'd say for the last 10 years and more, the expense is more than 50% in any institution that you take towards technology. And so it's one economic benefit we're giving to those, and the other is, again, we are being exposed and being weak towards the principles of those technologies. So that concern is there. Yes, indigenization again, but again, till the time we don't become indigenous, I would again say we should go and approach our regional partners for that. Turkey is there, Malaysia is there, China is there. So uh, look at China. Instead of building their own capability in AI, they want to progress well, and they want to implement their AI solutions and their implementations. They want to move on with their AI implementations, but they are using Chinese AI technology. So instead of first building their own technology and then implementing it, so they are partnering with their friendly countries and their region. And the last thing, cyber diplomacy. Definitely, sir, that's a very detailed topic. We cannot sum it here, but the concept, like you just mentioned, like many other, like any other conventional diplomacy doors, this cyber diplomacy is very much there in the other parts of the world. Farooq is also aware of it. And so we've done that. We've done a little effort on that also. So maybe offline, I'll share some brief on that, and we can definitely talk about it in detail also. Thank you.
Thank you, Khwaja Sahab. Now we'll move towards the final segment of this event, and I will invite Ambassador Khalid Mahmood, Chairman Board of Governors, for his concluding remarks. Ambassador Khalid Mahmood is a former ambassador of Pakistan to Iran, Iraq, China, Saudi Arabia, and Mongolia. He has served as the first secretary and later as deputy permanent representative of Pakistan to the United Nations, New York. He has worked as Director General of UN, Additional Secretary of United Nations, Asia Pacific and Africa, and former permanent representative of Pakistan to the Organization of Islamic Conference and the Economic Cooperation Organization. Sir, you have the floor, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. As was to be expected, we heard a very impressive talk by Mr. Farooq Nair, followed by a very substantive contribution by Khwaja Muhammad Ali. And this conversation was further enriched during the question and answer session. See, the technology is inexorably progressing. If you look back in the past, where we were and where we are now. And artificial intelligence, cyber technology, these are now new buzzwords, And so much so that it has, excited the imagination of the people that what lies in a store in the future. And these developments are really mind-boggling. I was reading somewhere that, Google claims to have developed a quantum computer which can compute in just 3 minutes what old computers used to take 10,000 years. But this was disputed by IBM. They said, no, it will take 2.5 days. Still, what used to take 10,000 years to compute, it can be now computed in 2.5 years. And rightly so that President Putin has said that whoever leads in artificial intelligence will rule the world. So the impact of this developments in technology is being felt in every segment of human life, at every level. As was pointed out, that as regards cyber technology, it touches telecommunication, financial management, governance, energy, health, what have you. In every field, it's having an impact. So much so that the concept of security has expanded. And cybersecurity is now part of national security, which is all encompassing. And there, as was also pointed out by Mr. Farooq, that there are so many actors now, not only governments, it is criminals, terrorists, civil organizations, all are partaking this cyber technology techniques. And also it is having an impact on the conventional military defense. Previously it extended only to land, sea and air, and at the most space. Now we are talking of outer space. So I think more impact of which I fear and which is very dangerous is what impact it has on the nuclear capabilities of people, of the countries. We have a case in point, India, Pakistan. And there are examples where nuclear installations, nuclear programs have been attacked. So this could be, unless it is properly managed, it could be mutually destructive, or it could destabilize, undermine the strategic stability, the tenuous strategic stability which we have in our region. And that applies to other parts of the world also. So we need to have some rules, regulations at the national level, at the regional level, at the international level. Amna Rafiq has pointed out the difficulties in the way, but there is no other way except to agree on some common rules of engagement. Otherwise, it will be a wild card, cybersecurity, and anyway, any time things can go awry. But in developing this, as has been recommended by Mr. Farooq, a national cybersecurity policy, we have to involve government, civil society, corporations, and every sector of the society. And very useful recommendations have been made by Mr. Farooq and Khwaja Muhammad Ali. And I think all needs urgent attention. They are not isolated in any way. They are reinforce each other. And if we are lagging behind in one of the recommendations, I think the whole response could not be as robust as we would like to have. But I am not really what I can say. I have not lost hope, because in the past also these technologies, disrupting technologies, have been coming, which have a dual-edged. They had good applications, adverse impact, and ultimately, I think the collective wisdom of the international community put them more for the productive end. I think same thing I expect would happen in the case of cyber technology and the threat it poses. It not only poses, it just not poses threat, it has many beneficial applications also. So what we need is to have rules, regulations to maximize its beneficial impact and try to reduce its negative implications. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Khalid Mahmood, sir, for your concluding remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, with these concluding remarks, we come to an end to our pep talk. And once again, I thank you, all the participants, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. Especially, I thank you, Mr. Farooq Nayyar, for his time. I also thank you, Khwaja Muhammad Ali, for his time, and Ms. Amna Rafiq. And also, I thank Ambassadors Azam Chaudhary and Mr. Khalid Mahmood for their time. Once again, thank you all for participating and joining us today. Take care, Allah Hafiz, and have a nice weekend.